This next example is not going to be critical at all to this overall video series, so if you feel like geeking out, stick around and watch. Otherwise, go ahead and just skip over it to the next section where I'll be actually working with converting some black and white images. But for now, this idea just came to me, and I thought it might be worth exploring a little bit. What I have here is a picture of an orchid. And it's just a standard RGB image, so we can see here in the channels palette that each of these channels is a black and white image. So what I've done is I have gone through and extracted out each of these channels as a black and white image, and I combined them as layers in a different document here, so that we have the red channel as a layer, we have the green channel as a layer, and we have the blue channel as a layer. Now, if you're one of those people who, when I said a color image is made up of 3 black and white images, and Photoshop later on adds the color in, if you're one of the people who says, how does that work? This is an example to kind of explain how this happens in the channels palette. And since we just went over how the gradient map adjustment layers work in a separate exercise, it seems like this should be a good time to sort of pull all of this stuff together and make it work. So if you haven't already guessed, what this means is I'm going to map a primary color onto each one of these individual black and white layers and then blend them together to make a color image. So to begin with, I've turned off the visibility of all of the layers except for my bottom layer, which is the blue. And I'm going to select that layer and on top of it add a gradient map. Now, as I mentioned at one point, when you're looking at a channel in the channels palette, bright areas are where there is the most of that particular color. So if it's the blue channel, then the bright areas are where there's the most blue. So what I'm going to do here is map blue to the lightest tones in the image. So I'm going to click on my gradient here, select my brightest point, and select pure blue. I just did this down here in the RGB selector. There's no red, no green, and 255 is the highest possible value of blue. So I click OK. And now, in my layers palette, you see that I've got my gradient map, and it is affecting this blue layer, and it makes the whole thing look blue. The last thing that I'm going to do here with these 2 layers is I only want this gradient map to affect the layer below it. So I'm just going to hold down the Alt key, and when I hover on this line between the 2 layers, you see it changes and I get this different icon. If you click there, then it sort of links this layer just to the one that is directly below it. It's called a clipping mask, but we'll get into that some other time. So now I'm just going to go through and do the same thing for the other layers with their respective channels. So I'm going to select my second layer, which will be the green layer. I'm going to make that visible and create a gradient map. I'm going to edit my gradient and make that brightest tone green. Okay. Go back to my layers palette, and I want to create a clipping mask out of this. So again, I hold down the Alt key and click when I'm hovering over this border. Then I'm going to go up to the first layer, which will be red, make that visible, create a gradient map, edit the gradient, select red, click OK, and finally I will also make this a clipping mask. So again, now each of these gradient maps only affects the single layer below it. It doesn't affect any of the ones further down the list. Alright, so now one of our black and white images looks red, one of them looks green, and one of them looks blue, but we still don't have a true color image. We've just got a set of different colored images. So what we're going to have to do is blend all of these three layers together. And to do that, we will use the blending modes for each layer. So I'm going to start with the red layer here, and I'm going to go in and change this to screen. You can see already there's some blending going on. Now I'm going to go down to the green layer, change that to screen, and now you can see we've got a color image. We've got yellows, we've got these purples in the petals that we saw to begin with. Now this image isn't actually quite as vibrant looking as the original. Take a look at the original here. Okay, so there's the original. There's our new combined image. And there's clearly something going on in the channels palette beyond just blending the three layers together in screen mode. I'm not sure what it is. Deke McClelland would probably be able to tell me, but I don't know. So I'll just leave it at this. But hopefully this gives you a better understanding of the relationship between the individual grayscale color channels in an RGB image and the full color image that they produce. This experiment probably makes more sense for those of you who already understand what the different blending modes are. So let me just clarify why I chose the screen blending mode. The screen blending mode gets its name from the fact that it simulates the different layers being projected from multiple projectors onto one screen. That's how old-fashioned projector televisions worked, or a lot of modern video projectors. They use three different lenses to project the three colors onto a screen, where the wavelengths of light interact and blend to give us all of the colors that we see. Here is one in operation. This picture comes from Wikipedia. But basically, we've got the three separate colors separated out, projected together to create a full color image, which is why I chose that blend mode. Okay, so enough of that. Let's get back to work on black and white photography. Now that we've spent a bunch of time looking at all of these different ways that we can convert color images to black and white, I think it's a good time to spend a little bit more time on a couple of the more important methods. I'm going to open up one of these files. I think I'll open up this one. This is a photo that I took in the Pawnee grasslands in Colorado, and it's not an especially exciting image, but it should be a good example of how to convert a color image to black and white to accentuate the detail in the sky and create a more dramatic skyscape. As long as this is already open in Adobe Camera Raw, why don't I just do the conversion here? So before anything else, I'm going to click Convert to Grayscale. Technically, the first thing that I would do before I even start thinking about doing my conversions is if there were problems with the exposure, I would come over just to the main window here and I would adjust the brightness, and in fact I think I will add just a touch of fill light just so that I have a little more detail to work with down here in the foreground. I'm not clipping any highlights, so I will go ahead and leave it at that. I do want to just double check that my whites are neutral, and it looks like they're pretty close. So now I'm going to go over to my HSL grayscale window here, and there are a couple of different things that I want to do. I want to darken the blues. So of course the first thing to do is take my blues slider and pull that down. Now some of these tones were also a little bit greenish, so I'm going to move my aquas down, and just to keep things smooth I'm going to move the purples down a little bit as well. And that was really the only thing that I knew from the start that I wanted to do. For the rest of these sliders, I'm actually just going to play around with them a little bit and see what happens if I, say, push this yellow way up. Does anything change? Well, I get some extra detail here in the foreground. Let me slide that back down a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just decide exactly how much detail I want. And I actually want a dark bar of tone across the top, and I also want it to stay dark across the bottom. I just want detail within that darkness. So I'm going to slide that up a little bit. No, I think I have enough detail even down here. So I'm going to leave that dark. Might even darken it up a little bit more. There. What about the red? If I add red, does anything happen? No, there's virtually no change at all, so I'm going to leave that zeroed out. The orange, there's a little bit of change down in the foreground, but not a whole lot. Oh, I see there's also a little bit of change in the sky. In this area here, for example, there must be some orange tones there in the clouds, and that looks a lot better when they're brighter. So I'm going to move my oranges up. And it doesn't hurt anything else. Actually, it adds some nice detail into the foreground as well. So I already played around with yellows. And what about the greens? If I bring the greens up, it gives me all kinds of kind of noisy detail down here in the foreground. Let's take a look at that again. You can see it goes from being really dark with some bushy looking detail, and if you push that up, it almost smooths it out. You see, actually you see more of the green sort of grassy vegetation, but I preferred that with a scrubbier look. So I'm going to drop those greens down. Yeah, right about in there somewhere. Alright, and I've already moved my aquas and blues and purples. The magentas I don't expect will do a whole lot. And if that did anything, I couldn't tell what it was. So I will just leave that at 0 as well. So